Hello everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I can tell you New York is pretty frigid. But the good news is that in Montreal it's minus 20. In case you're interested. I'm saying that for the Montreal listeners. But the goal of this get together is to warm our hearts and souls and immunize us against all the cold and hostile world out there, both materially and spiritually. Okay. So we dedicate this class to Rivka Bat Leah for Refuah Shlema. Good friend Alan. Your mother should be completely, miraculously healed and quickly, and until that moment it should be with the least amount of aggravation. And that's the topic that we're dealing with here. How to deal with life's difficulties in a positive way. This is a topic, of course, that is we've addressed time and time again. And not only we, everybody has addressed it. I mean, the two biggest headlines since the beginning of history have been either stories about love and courtship, or stories about pain and suffering. As the marketers like to put it, there's two principles. There's the pleasure principle and there's the pain principle. You're either selling people something that gives them pleasure, or you're selling them something to prevent pain. I know it sounds quite simplistic, but often if you think about it in life, that's the two big pressure points that provoke people and get their attention. So we'll be talking about this discussion, especially this evening as well. In the Hebrew calendar, we're going into the 10th of Tevet. The month of Tevet, this Hebrew month of Tevet, the 10th of Tevet is a fast day. And it's one of the 4 fast days that are discussed in the Tanakh. All around, 3 of them are connected to the destruction of the temple. One, of course, Yom Kippur, everybody knows. Yom Kippur is a Day of Atonement. That's a unique category of its own. But there's 3 others that reflect 3 different stages and when the temples were destroyed. First temple by the Babylonians and the second one by the Romans. The first event has happened tomorrow, and that is when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, of course, is modern day approximately Iraq, when the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, surrounded and besieged the city of Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem, as we know, is surrounded by a wall, and this wall was now encamped and besieged by the Babylonians. It would remain that way for a few years until they finally breached the wall. First they tried to choke off all the resources, all the supplies, and then finally breached the wall. That would be on the 17th of Tammuz, which is another fast day, the beginning of the traditional 3 weeks. And then, of course, the day that most people are most familiar with is 3 weeks after that, they actually burned down the temple. Both the Babylonians and the Romans on the same day, interestingly, even though it was 490 years apart. So, Tisha B'Av, of course, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. These are in this part of the hemisphere in the summer months. We're now in the winter months. But it all begins with the encampment. So it seems to be apropos to talk about the challenges of life, because this is a way is the part of Jewish history in general and history all over, overall, and that is dealing with difficult times. So to pose an opening question, which is always good to think about for all of us, how do you deal with setbacks and disappointments? There are times we ask the question how we deal with joys and victories and successes, but there are times we have to ask ourselves, how do we deal with the setbacks? Because the fact is, it's inevitable. There's no person on earth that is immune from the reality that there will be some downs in our lives. There will be times when things don't work out the way we want. Sometimes it's a more minor type of difficulty, and sometimes it's more traumatic. It could be a loss, it could be a death, it could be any type of transition, disappointment, heartbroken, broken promises, all the different things that you can list and fill in the blanks. And obviously knowing how we react to these type of moments in our lives tells you a lot about yourself, your resilience, your ability to bounce back, your ability to ride through these situations. But for many people, it's very demoralizing, humiliating, and actually disturbs and upsets often their whole equilibrium and their life, to the point that it can really paralyze people and really, literally, I don't want to say the word destroy, but definitely create serious havoc in a person's life, as we see all the time. People don't go to therapy and pay therapists just to have fun. They're going to try to deal with some of these pains that we deal with. Some of them are psychic pains, some are psychological and emotional, some can't even be physical, but it's a big, I don't want to call it industry, but it's a big need, and perhaps in our time more than ever. Some people say it's due to the blessings of our time and our freedoms and our prosperity that causes also so much leisure, which in turn has a side effect of causing so much aggravation. When people were much more living in much more oppressed times and more impoverished times, they didn't have time to think about their needs so much, so they weren't as miserable, paradoxically. But however you analyze it, which is really not the topic today, is the bottom line is there is the challenges of life. Now, obviously, one has to distinguish between real challenges and imagined ones. Some people have everything going for them and they're still not happy. That doesn't mean something going wrong. Maybe internally they just don't have the security, or are driven by lives of fear. Success is a very relative term. You can be very successful in business and work, and financially in other ways, and still be a complete wreck, and internally feel extremely what's the word I want to use? Upset or anxious, and so on. So there's a lot to talk about. There's many different angles. Obviously, one class can't cover exhaustively every detail. Take the course is really, as the title suggests, how to deal with the difficulties. I would say how to navigate is what we're going to talk about, really. Because avoiding difficulties is impossible and not expected. As I said, everybody's going to face some type of difficulty. The difference between one person and the next is how we deal with it, how we manage it, and how we navigate. And there are, of course, different ways. As I said, from one extreme, it can be completely devastating, overwhelming, demoralizing, and lead to all kinds of unhealthy behavior. On the other extreme, you find people who are able to navigate, and not that they suffer less, but they know how to manage, they know how to ride through it, they know how to manage it, and grow in the process as well. Obviously, the goal of this discussion is to get to that type of place. And in between is the rest of us, most people, where it's in between. Not complete necessary devastation, but on the other hand, not necessarily find easy ways to maneuver and to work through the more difficult times. In situation difficulty, and I'm speaking specifically in this case, this class dedicated is a woman who I personally know, gone through many challenges, health challenges, things that are not in one's control. It's not, some things are man's making, sometimes we cause our own troubles, but sometimes things happen that are not up to us. And that adds another dimension to it, because it's like you can't even forget about blaming yourself. You can't even identify a culprit. Obviously, we don't blame ourselves for it. That doesn't help anybody, because even if one's at fault for their own difficulties, after the fact, you still have to deal with it. But then there's situations where there was no fault at all, so it just makes it more confusing, because then you have the big question, why? Why do we have to go through this? What does God want? Why is God, so to speak, not letting somebody be at peace, or in some way being compromised health-wise, whatever that health issue may be? So that just adds in the, I would say, the upheaval, and often the difficulty to really navigate, because then all these questions become also a burden, an additional burden, in addition to the actual problem, the questions we have, and the confusion, and the guilt, perhaps, and all the other debilitating emotions that are secondary to the actual problem, but they still can be as powerful, if not more powerful, in how we maneuver. Because it's one thing one thing is a challenge, but then if also your navigational tools get compromised, then you can't even ride through it. So that, of course, only adds to and accentuates the issue that we're addressing here. So that's the topic, that's the question, the challenge. As I said, how do we deal with these type of moments? Now, obviously, we'd all love to be able to just avoid them, or deal with it in a way where it just passes very quickly. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to deal with something head on. So obviously, some people, as I said, get devastated. Other people go into a form of denial, where they numb themselves. They don't really feel the pain, or at least minimize it, and just try to avoid it. Others go head on, smack right into it, and just suffer. And as again, yet others learn to navigate. And that's, of course, the goal. And I'm sure there's other methods that people use or don't use that you can fill in. I'm not going to, as I said, cover every possible scenario, just covering the general approaches to this. And of course, we always begin by asking God and praying that and blessing each other that we should have the least amount of aggravation in our lives. But obviously, I'm speaking about things that are already in play and that you have to deal with. But the best would be to not have any of this, but as I said, that's inevitable. And hopefully people in this room or people listening are right now going through only pleasant moments in their lives. But you may have a friend, you may have a relative, you may have someone that you know, a stranger even, that you may be able to share a kind word with that can help them navigate. And of course, there are always moments that will come, even though right now things may be great. There's always moments that there will be setbacks and there will be disappointments or worse. So, many ways to address this, but I think it's important maybe to begin with something I talk about a lot, but especially in this context. One of the reasons that we find painful and uncomfortable moments difficult is because we live in the moment, which means right now that's what you feel and that's what you're experiencing. So that becomes all-consuming. If you're able to imagine or able to think of life as a moving, like a journey, a voyage. Think of it like a film or like a book. So even though one chapter or one section or one part of the story, one frame, may be a difficult one, but the story continues. I think one of the things that I find that many people have difficulty doing is understanding that their life is a ongoing story. And that story has many different chapters and many different legs to the journey, and they're not all going to be the same. That's what makes life a journey. A journey means it's not the same. You ride on a highway, or you're in a ship in the ocean, which I think is even a better analogy here. The sea is not stable. Sometimes it's calm, and sometimes it's stormy. Sometimes it's raging. And even when it's calm, there's always waves. It's never completely flat line, as we talk about many times. Waves, a wave, just like your heartbeat is a wave. Life is mobile. And even though this does not have an automatic solution, but one of the things that one has to reframe their minds is that your life is not moments. Your life is a journey. It's an ongoing journey. I find that people who see it that way and experience it that way, generally speaking, have more resilience and more ability to navigate because they understand the journey. And the ones that have more difficulties, the ones that get locked. Like right now, I'm not comfortable. That's all I want to know. People who live for instant gratification and see life as a bunch of moments, and they just want to have pleasurable moments, find it much more difficult to deal with a painful moment because they just see it as a beginning and an end. They don't see any journey here. They don't see movement. And I think in our day and age, especially with technology, even though technology officially is supposed to emancipate us, make us feel even more mobile. I mean, isn't that what a phone is called? Mobile phones. It's supposed to be communication. Yet there's a strange irony that technology in some ways has also, in a way, made us more immobile, more stationary. You could sit in one chair and be stimulated just by watching the screen and not move for hours and think you're moving because you're watching others move. Or you're watching others in a film, and you become the observer, the couch potato, the metaphorical couch potato that just watches other people moving, and you feel you're being stimulated by that. So it's ironic how technology suddenly can turn us into immobile entities while we're watching the rest of the world moving around and very exciting and all the drama involved in it, and we live vicariously through other people moving. Once upon a time, take away technology, your only stimulation is getting out of your chair and meeting somebody or doing something, traveling somewhere. I'm not saying it's all cut out, we don't do it at all. Obviously we do, but increasingly technology can also cause you to become a complete loner and a hermit, where you have thousands of friends maybe in social media, but you don't have one friend that you speak to in a heartfelt way. And you could even create false identities and illusions and delusions, and you could live fantasy land. I don't know if it still exists, but I remember a website, or more than a website, it was a whole, you bought into it. It was called Second Life. It still exists. I don't know if anybody heard of it. Check it out. Second Life. You paid heavy dues, like something like $10,000 a year, and you get a Second Life online where you can create your own identity, and you meet other people who've created their own identity, and you just live, with a whole series of services where you live in fantasy land. That's why it was called Second Life, meaning you have your life and there's a second life. I never really analyzed it, but I just remember seeing it, and it struck me that people are actually doing that. Now I understand why. Their lives are not happy with their lives, so they create a second life. And they feel it's ethical because they're not actually cheating on anyone, and they're not really lying because they still have their first life. But online they create this imaginary identity, and you can just be anybody. You can be a different type of career, you can be a different gender every day if you like, I guess, or whatever it may be that stimulates people that way. Point being is that technology does not necessarily, it can help us grow spiritually and psychologically, but could also help us become even more secluded and isolated in this so-called external and superficial stimulation. So when you see life that way, in moments, as a moment, instead of a continuum, it becomes more painful when you're in pain because you only see that as a self-contained experience. And that's all you see. It's very myopic and very narrow. You'll see it consistently. Anyone that deals with challenges well always has a more bird's eye view of life. It's not that their pain is less, and it's not that they are more immune to pain, is they just don't see the moment as the beginning and end of it all. Just to give you an example of a Jewish tradition that everybody's familiar with. Under the chuppah, which is a wedding ceremony, there's a strange custom. After the ceremony and the blessings and the wine and all that, before everybody yells out Mazel Tov, you'll see time and again, they take a glass or a cup, it's usually a glass, they wrap it in some type of thing so it shouldn't hurt anybody. They put it under the foot of the groom, and he smashes it. Smashes the glass. Excuse me. Shatters the glass, and everybody yells Mazel Tov. I know I've been to many weddings, I've officiated, and sometimes weddings where people have no clue what this is. So I remember once at a wedding, a guy sitting near me says to me, I understand all the other things, beautiful ceremony, tradition, I don't get it all, but I pick up, what's this thing with the breaking of the glass, and why would breaking a glass lead to a Mazel Tov? So it's true, there is a custom in Jewish world where our grandmothers, when a child would, let's say, drop a glass on the floor or a plate would break, so they would say Mazel Tov. In other words, even the shattered things also lead to something positive. Now, one of the reasons we do it is because we remember the destruction of the temple, going back to the 10th of Tevis, the beginning of the process. So, but the question just carries over. Why is it important to remember? Of all moments, the high point of a person's life is their moment of marriage. There'll be plenty of challenging moments, rest assured. Why do we have to remind people, right in the middle of the chuppah, the highest point, hey, the temple was destroyed. Wait till the end of the wedding if you need to remind people, Usually, under the chuppah, I say, there are obviously exceptions, unfortunately. Usually under the chuppah, there's still no domestic strife. People are probably still in love at that moment, right before the honeymoon. So why do you have to remind them of the destruction of the temple? So I'm sure there are many explanations given, but one that always struck me was a deep psychological insight, which is both deep and, in a way, simple. And that is, it's appreciating the journey of life. People who, when they're happy and joyous, are completely happy and joyous, 100%. And they forget that we live in a world where somebody in your neighbor or someone else in the world may be broken heart, or suffering in some other way. So we become so consumed in a way almost like selfishly with our own joy. That is not a healthy thing. It's important to have humility even when you're successful and when things are going well. So we remind ourselves that even in this high point, highest point of a person's life, with love and celebration and family and everything going so beautifully, you still remember the world is not a perfect place. There are shattered pieces, there are shattered lives, there are shattered hearts. And it all goes down. There was a shattered temple, which reflected a certain dissonance and schism between heaven and earth, between the divine and existence, between who we are and what we do, between matter and spirit. And when you remember in your highest points of joy those that may be more needy, then when we go through the cycle of life and the wheel turns and we come to a point where we are not completely happy, it's also not complete consumption. Meaning you're not completely consumed with your sadness because you remember that there's also joyous moments. And that's the context of it all. So in other words, it's never, anyone that's fully consumed with one emotion will also be fully consumed with the opposite emotion as well. So if you're completely joy and there's no room for anything else, then often when there's complete sadness, there also will be no room for anything else, and that creates that sense of resignation and hopelessness and despair, which only exacerbates the problem. So it's about understanding a cycle, the cycle of life. The cycle of life is waves, and a wave by definition has peaks and valleys. It goes up and it goes down. That's the essence of a real journey. So the challenge is now, besides knowing that it's a journey, is, okay, so how do we travel well? What tools and what skills and what methodologies and attitudes do we need to be able to travel well? So I think if we use the travel analogy, the journey, and let's take a ship on the ocean, because as I said, ocean is more natural than, let's say, an automobile or a vehicle on the road. Take a ship on the ocean, we can learn what makes a ship able to navigate even a raging storm. So looking at a ship's structure and looking at how it's built and the methods used to deal with different situations can be a great analogy of how we should learn tools to deal with our oceans or our seas, whether they're raging or they're calm or they're moving slowly or whatever comes our way. And we know, ocean seas present all kinds of challenges, not just storms. There are icebergs, and there are other factors that can challenge a ship's voyage through the waters. So if we think of life like the waters, because it's like a wave, and those waves sometimes get choppy and sometimes worse, raging, difficult, then we can learn from that tools that we need. So let's go through a few things. I'm not going to go through a whole ship's engineering, but I would think that somebody could probably write a pretty comprehensive paper and go through every aspect of a ship and derive from that lessons in our own lives. I'll just go through a few elements. Mind you, I should also add, ships are also man-made. Ships are not man-made. How did we figure out how to build ships? We looked at fish. We looked at creatures that manage the waters, that know how to navigate. Just like airplanes were like somewhat of a replica of a bird with wings and the word that was missing, propulsion. Yeah, I heard that, but a different word I was looking for. What's beneath the wings of birds that give them the ability to fly. It's called, it's a word everybody knows. It'll come to me. The aerodynamics of birds became the model for which planes were built. Just like cameras were built by modeling the human eye, or the animal eye, the eye, the shutter, the iris, the pupil, all the elements that require being able to. So really all technology, all inventions are really just replicating nature one way or another. So here are the things, the most basics. The first thing with a ship on an ocean, a voyage, a few key things are necessary. I will soon talk about the ship itself. I'm just talking about that which comes with the ship. You need to have a captain. You need someone that's a steward, that's going to steer the ship in the right direction. not just steer in the right direction, but know when to go quickly, when to go slower, how to deal with a storm, how to avoid or how to navigate. You need to have, as well, a destination. A ship without a destination is going to go in circles and be lost at sea. And that's not necessarily going to help it be able to navigate if you don't know where you're going. In that sense, you could also say there's a point of departure and there's a destination. So the captain, the destination. Then there's the things that the ship itself has. It's a certain element of flotation. It's built in a way that it does not sink. Now, obviously, if it's damaged or in some way gets hits an iceberg or something else, some way it could submerge and sink. But a healthy ship is one that has the ability, that has the structure, that it can float, and can, more than float, it can travel through the water without being capsized. And of course, we know great storms have brought down ships, but the better the ship is built, and the stronger, more resilient it is, the more powerful it is, the more we're able to face and handle any type of storm. So let's just begin with those elements, and I'll get into some more perhaps afterwards. So how does that translate into our own lives? So the fact is we need a captain. Who's the captain in your life? Your life's journey. If you would say that your body and soul, your body is like your vehicle, your ship, and life's circumstances, life's experiences are like the sea, which means whatever you're traveling through. And the more difficult times are like the stormy, raging seas. The better times are the calm seas. So who's the captain in this analogy? The captain, of course, is your soul, is your mind, where the soul rests and resides. It is the one that gives direction and knows how to deal with any given situation. So let's say there's a storm coming in our ship. In the ship, the captain is the one that gives instructions to the crew what to do, how to navigate, how to turn, how to twist, how to deal with all the different twists and turns. In our own beings, that would be the equivalent of our minds, which, as I said, is the seat of the soul that gives direction. What happens when a person gets overwhelmed or deals with a challenge? Our emotions take over. And when your emotions take over, you often become lost at sea. Why? Because emotions are very impulsive and they react instead of being proactive. They don't have a plan. Something happens to you, your emotions, left to their own accord, just can become overwhelmed, can become fearful, can become, as I said, impulsive. You can make a lot of mistakes. That's what happens. When a person is in an emotionally challenged situation, they can panic. They can actually do things that make things worse. So how do you keep your wits about you? Because that's the captain. That's what you need, a captain who does not panic and does not get frightened by or in any way overwhelmed by the circumstances. So yes, we are blessed with minds which carry our souls that have the capacity to be the captain of the ship. But remember, a captain of the ship is a captain even long before the ship goes to sea. So once the storm strikes and someone says, you know what, where's the captain? You're going to have a problem. That's why it's so important to preempt situations, to already have your captain ready before the storm strikes. It's like, let's say you go out and everyone's so overconfident, we don't need a captain, let's just go to sea. Everything's going well, great. But then suddenly a storm is ahead. Someone says, where's the captain? They said, we didn't hire a captain. Well, you didn't hire a captain, why? Because everybody thought nothing's going to happen. Like that joke from Chelm, where the guy goes out with his friend, they're going outside, and he's carrying an umbrella, and suddenly it begins to rain. But he doesn't open the umbrella, it starts pouring. So his friend says, why don't you open the umbrella? He says, my umbrella is full of holes, so it won't really protect us. So he says, why did you bring it then? He says, because I didn't think it was going to rain. This is one of the Chelm stories. People doing strange things. He didn't think it was going to rain. So the key thing is to remember you hire a captain and you appoint a captain before the storm strikes. Once there's a storm, it's not that easy to suddenly say, okay, let's start navigating. Because a captain anticipates, which means the following. From our earliest of age, when we educate our children, from the earliest of age, we need to teach them that they have a captain inside of them, inside their ship. And that captain is their mind. And the mind is reflective and allows the soul to speak and tell the body where to go, not the other way around. Which means the captain has a sense of direction. The soul also has a sense of destination, a purpose. We're going somewhere. So how do we get to that destination? If you're left completely, as I said before, to your emotions, we will literally be complete human beings. We will be driven by whatever strikes our fancy at that moment. You look at something, oh, I like it, okay, that's it. Something else distracts you, and there you are. Emotions, unchecked, are essentially impulsive forces that just react and are seduced by moments. That idea of a journey, of having a concept, that there's a journey and there's a map, is the domain of the captain, is the domain of the mind and of the soul. Without that, we are basically reacting to circumstances. Look at your own life. Think about today or yesterday. How many things that today or yesterday that you've done, or any day for that matter, that you're reacting to circumstances or you're reacting to someone else's expectations or demands or orders or pleasing them or not pleasing them? How many things are driven by reactive reactions instead of being proactive? And how many things are driven by a captain that has a plan, has a mission? I talk about this very often about that. Just like a business can't function without a mission statement, can a human being truly function without a personal mission statement? That means having a destination, a goal. And a mission cannot be just, I'll make money, I'll be happy. Those are platitudes, and they are too general. A mission has to be unique to you, has to be defined, has to be measurable. What is success, etc. So the idea of looking at life that way, from the outset, is critical to being able to deal with storms. Because without a captain, you're not going to be able to navigate. The ship can capsize, can be overwhelmed. So it's critical to establish that. So the first thing is the preemptive approach, which is training yourself and learning how to have inside of you your captain, which long before a storm strikes gives you that type of sense of direction and confidence and know-how. And you train yourself. A good captain is trained to know what to do in given circumstances. Now, of course, the question is, what happens if I didn't do that? And the storm has struck, and I don't have a captain available. Or my own captain hasn't been cultivated or developed. So we'll talk about that in a moment. That's also, obviously, quite a common scenario. But obviously, I'm speaking about here how to do things the best possible way, which is the preemptive way. So the more you nurture your soul, the more you nurture your spiritual aspirations, the more you ask yourself the question, why am I here? And what is my destination? Why am I here? Why did I come to this world? And the better you give an answer to these questions, and the more they drive your life, the easier it is to deal with challenging situations. Because the challenge then becomes exactly that. It's a setback or a difficulty in a long journey. However, if you never ask that question, and your life is completely determined by the moments of the circumstances, and there's no captain around, what do you think is going to happen when the storm strikes? You'll be completely overwhelmed. Or lost. You won't even know where to begin. Be completely, because you have never thought about these questions. You don't even see a journey. You just see, okay, that's where, now we got a storm to deal with. What are we going to do now? It's like almost building a house, God forbid, that's not fireproof. It doesn't have smoke alarms. It doesn't have any warnings. So you hoped for the best, but it didn't work out that way always. I mean, no one should know of that, but I mean to say you haven't created an environment where you can deal with a crisis because you didn't even realize that you have to do that. So the first tip is that type of direction, a sense of direction and purpose and destination, and a captain that's guiding it and that steering it in that way. Viktor Frankl developed an entire system called logotherapy, man's search for meaning, which he began to develop before the war, but then it became confirmed, as he writes in his book and his talks, different writings, how he saw during the Holocaust, which was maybe one of the biggest storms in history of all, challenging people to the limit, pushed them to their edge, if not beyond. He saw people who had a sense of meaning and purpose in life navigate these challenges better than their peers who did not, and developed the whole thing about man's search for meaning. Then when you have meaning, you can get through anything in life. That doesn't mean there's less pain. It doesn't mean there's less suffering. It means that the pain and suffering somewhere is overshadowed by the bigger purpose. So you suffer, but you know it's going somewhere. And that gives you that edge to be able to fight and the hope that we'll get through this. Someone has none of that. So when their life is going well, great. But when it's not, they have nothing to hold on to. They haven't built any, let's use another analogy from a ship, anchors. They don't have anything to hold on to. There's nothing. Which is actually one of the things a ship does actually. In sometimes you have to throw down your anchor and just stay and not try to fight the waves. Just be where you are and try to maintain balance. But when you have never developed or even thought about building a life of meaning and purpose and mission, and clearly also then will not have a captain, what do you think happens? Sadly. So that's the most important thing, is that type of sense of purpose and sense of direction, and the captain, which is, we all have in our own we are naturally born with the ability to reflect with our minds, to learn, to train ourselves, and to find that type of spiritual direction in life, of where is the deeper purpose of where we're going. Then when the storm strikes, it becomes part of that journey. You can deal with it easier, and moreover, which I hope to discuss a little more at length, and that a little later at length, that is also to grow even through a storm. Because storms can help us grow, which we'll soon talk about. But I wanted to cover the other side of the story of someone, okay, that's great. If you've built up these resources, you've built up your arsenal, and now you have the tools to deal with any challenge. But what about if you haven't, and a storm strikes? What do you do then? So definitely infinitely more difficult, because now you're in the middle of it. And you can't suddenly say, you know what, time out. I need a little time. Just like in the middle of a war, you can't suddenly say, time out, I need to go train. No, now you're in it. So not all is lost. It's more difficult, there's no question about it. But there's those solutions there too. And here are a few of them. First of all, we always have other people in our lives. So even if you may be overwhelmed, it's like you may be drowning due to the fact that you did not prepare, but there's a thing called lifeguards. There are people who have strength, and they're also not affected by the subjectivity that we often suffer from. So obviously this is all metaphorical. We're not talking about physically drowning, but often our own biases and prejudices and blind spots don't allow ourselves in a time of a storm to see anything. So now we're in the middle of the storm. However, if you hold on to someone else, stretches out their arm, or throws you a rope, so though you may not have the strength, they can give you strength. So it's critical, in case that indeed happens, is to reach out to friends, to family, to anyone that will actually show you some a sympathetic ear, or offer you a sympathetic hand. I just want to say that's true even if you have a captain. It's always good to have that type of support, because that always helps. So in addition to what I said before about purpose, destination, captain, having that support. But if you don't have the captain, becomes critical. That's one thing. Number two, even though we may be going through a storm and it may overwhelm us, fact of the matter is we still have the captain of the ship inside our spirits. It's just never been activated, so to speak. So that's why it's critical as well at that point to do spiritual activities like prayer or song or other things that may somewhat get that pilot flame that has not been accessed alive. Fan those flames. So a second thing to do when a person's in that situation, even though it may be very hard to do because you're not motivated, you're very overwhelmed, is to actually do something that's a little soulful. I find that people, for example, who are in difficult situations, you suggest, why don't you go volunteer? Go to a hospital, go to a place with needy children, special children, and volunteer to go for a walk or to be some way to show some compassion or be helpful to someone that may need something. So many people who are in a very difficult situation, they say, what are you talking about? I'm so overwhelmed with my life. Why are you sending me that? Because that can help you, because by doing that, that activates, that like stimulates, like a catalyst, part of that soul, the captain within you. And as strange as it may sound, even though you're not in the mood of it, it's maybe the most important thing for you right there and then, because it will bring out something in you that will give you a sense of value, sense of self-respect, and a sense of satisfaction. You say, I helped somebody today. What better force can necessary to counter negative feelings is bringing positive feelings inside of you. So when someone says, but I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so depressed, I feel so agitated over my situation, I don't have time to help somebody else. So you say that's exactly why you need it, because you need to somewhat weaken the hold of the agitation, of the negativity. So you need to bring in positive energy. So though it may sound good on paper, it's still difficult, but sometimes we have to force ourselves. And there are other methods as well. But I just wanted to cover that side of the story, the case. Now to go back to this captain analogy and the ship, if you look at a ship, as I said, you'll find other factors that make a ship function well, that make it, that allow it to ride the seas in an efficient way. So I'm not going to go through every one of them. I'm just talking a few basic elements. But I wanted to talk about the idea how storms can make us stronger. It's like they say about a tea bag. That human being is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong a person is until you put them into hot water. When you see a captain and a ship that has survived and endured a storm, you can rest assured that they know how to manage that, and they become stronger in the process. Like the expression goes, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. To me, I find this to be a fundamental. When I see someone who's calling out for help, they may not have a solution and they may feel completely overwhelmed, I find that to be a very critical point. Because there are a lot of people in trouble who don't call out for help. Either shame, pride, minimizing the issue, avoiding it, denial. When someone's calling out for help, even if they don't have an answer, it's already a sign of life. And I always tell this to people, the mere fact that you had the courage to ask for help, the courage to address it with another person, which may not make you look so good in the best light, that alone tells you there's something inside of you that's bothering you. You're saying, you know what, my pride, my ego, and all that, fine, but I want to be better. And as soon as a person has that will and that drive to be better, and that's more powerful than their pride and their other factors and fear, then you already know you're getting somewhere. Everybody has that pilot flame inside them. So it's there. And the question is accessing and building confidence in it. So now when a storm does strike, what do you think happens? And a person is able to get through it, it's going to make you stronger, because you see you can get through any difficult situation. Now that doesn't happen overnight, but it happens with time. And you see it again and again. I've seen it so many times in my life, that even though a person at the time felt complete hopelessness or despair, they went through it, they opened up, they were able to seek help, and in time, you grow to a place where you get stronger. As Hemingway put it, life breaks all people, but some are stronger in the broken places. Now he obviously did not live up to his own great line, as most people don't, and he proceeded to take his own life in his own depression. But the line's still strong, the line still stands right and strong. Some are stronger in the broken places. Because that's what happens. As people think, okay, something broken, then it's broken, and you may be able to fix it, but it's never going to be as strong as it was. Not with the spirit. The human spirit is such, because it's so powerful, it can actually get stronger. Not only, you break a bone, even physically, by the way, some cracks and some breaks, once it's healed, can get stronger. Not all, but some. But in the spirit, this always can make you stronger. Because the spirit is not defined by physical break. It's more of a psychological or emotional type of break. You can get through it. You build very great strengths. And you see this all the time. I see it all the time. I see people in challenging situations, whether it's in relationships or whether spouses, marriage, or family, siblings, or with friends. And there's a real challenge. There's really two options. The challenge will either break them apart, or if they get through it and dig deeper, it will create a deeper relationship, because it means even the break could not split them apart. That's what love that comes after a disappointment, or love that comes after a betrayal. And you can regain love. That love is far, far stronger. I'm not saying it's easy, but it gains a certain strength, because it says, you know what, we went through the fire and we did not get consumed. We went through the fire and we became stronger people as a result. So what does that testify to? At the end, it testifies to that power of the human spirit. So when we're dealing with challenges and this type of darker moments, and you know that, again, going back to the opening statement I made, which is it's a journey, it's a voyage, and a voyage has many different twists and turns and ups and downs and all kinds of different unexpected scenarios. The navigating that, and you know confidently that you have that spirit in you that's strong and with that destination, nothing can break you, nothing. Now that doesn't mean there aren't very difficult situations, but you know it's not the end of the story. There's a person who suffered greatly that I knew. She lost her husband at a young age, and she had her signature on her email. The signature said, "In the end, all will be good." If it's not good, it means it's not the end. So this wasn't a nice cliche or bumper sticker. It actually was coming from a person who suffered greatly. And I met her, I asked her about it. And I saw that she really wrote it from her heart in a very, very sincere and powerful way. Imagine someone saying that. In the end, all will be good. If it's not good, it means it's not the end. That's a person who sees a bigger story, a bigger picture. Now, obviously, we would love the difficult moments to end quickly and we can move on to more happier moments. But part of achieving that is your own attitude. And which again is something you see all the time. You see people's attitudes often prolong the agony and the problem even more than it's necessary. There are people, for instance, that when something bad happens, they always say, I always knew it. I knew I didn't deserve better. Everything I do always ends up in some failure. It's like life, it's like a self-fulfilled prophecy. And not that anyone celebrates over failure, but there's a certain element where if you're lacking confidence and lacking security, something doesn't work, you almost feel relieved. Because you know what, I don't have to deal with success. I just go back to my own script, which is I'm a failure. And how do you fight something like that? How do you challenge somebody that's in that state of mind? That they actually feel that's what they deserve. You have to tell them you don't deserve that. But they feel they deserve it. They always say to you, in these circumstances, you don't know me. If you really knew who I was, you know I wouldn't deserve it. So I say, I may not know you, but I know your soul. Maybe because you know yourself, that's the problem. Maybe you get to start to learn more about yourself that you don't know about. That's the whole point. Why are you coming to speak to me? To hear the same old script that you know already? You want to know about things you don't know, which is you have dimensions in you and strengths in you that you're not even aware of. It's not an easy battle, because a person who convinces themselves they don't, then even when they have that strength and an opportunity comes their way to grow, they don't hold on to it. They don't grab it. They say, no, I deserve this place of misery. And people start building up their threshold to pain, and to the point where, they manage. And you ask someone, so what do you feel like? They say, well, I'm in a perpetual state of pain, but it's exactly where I feel comfortable. So what would your life be like if you had no pain? Some people are actually terrified of the concept, because their comfort zone has grown around a situation that is compromising. So obviously these are very sad scenarios, but very unfortunately more common than not. But it all goes to demonstrate how a person can completely become their own worst enemy, where not only they only have a captain in the ship, they decide that the captain is meant to lead them to doom. You know, it's like what was that character? You know, the captain that just leads the ship straight to hell. I'm sure there's some books that talk about things like that. Anything comes to mind? Professor? Huh? Okay. Maybe in Dante's Inferno he may have some analogy. I don't remember now. He probably does. He has all these nightmare scenarios. So what else can we learn from a ship? Fine. These are, as mentioned, captain, the destination. I'll talk about floating. That's what I want to discuss. So what gives the buoyancy to a ship? Well, it's one of the oldest feats in engineering. Ships go back almost to the beginning of history. One of the first type of vehicles humans created to carry them across the seas. Different types of ships. They mastered it pretty quickly. It didn't take the thousands of years till they figured out how to build an airplane. Ships go back a long way. The reason for that is, most likely, because first of all, water was all around, and they had abilities to test it very easily without even actually being hurt. You could put something out to the water and see, is it going to move or not move? Is it going to float? And of course, they learned from as I said, the sea creatures. They learned from fish, how fish maneuver. Now, obviously, fish can live underwater. We can't. But nevertheless, they saw how objects float in the water. What causes something to float? So obviously, if it's built a certain way, if you look at a ship, the bottom of a ship, which actually most people don't ever see, and sometimes until they pull the ship out of the water, it looks actually quite strange. We always see half of the ship, the top that's like above water. But the bottom has a whole thing. It's like almost like a knife that cuts through the water. At the same time, it's built, of course, has to be waterproof and tight and airtight, so water does not allow water in. But then, things float on water. What is the equivalent in the psychological world? So there's interesting, I would say, Torah or thoughts from the Baal Shem Tov. Story in the Bible, the Torah, talks about the first ship ever built. It was Noah's Ark, right? And why was it built? Precisely because of the raging floodwaters that were to come. It's called the Teva of Noach, Tevis Noach. In Hebrew, there are three words for a ship. Teva is one, an ark. Sfina is like a ship, and Aniyah is another word. The word here uses Teva. So the Baal Shem Tov asked the question, why Teva? So first the story itself. The story is that the world became so corrupt, finally they self-destructed, and a flood came down and destroyed all life on earth. However, Noah Ish Tzaddik was a tzaddik, a righteous man, and his family were preserved, and they survived the flood that raging waters for 40 days and 40 nights. And in the ark, and then finally that ark, when the flood began to subside and ended and subsided, they were able to come out of that ark. So the ark essentially was a protection from the raging floodwaters. In Hasidic philosophy, there's so much written about the topic of the raging floodwaters, refers to all the raging challenges in our lives. Specifically, actually, Mayim Rabim, raging floodwaters, referring to the challenges in parnasa, in livelihood, the anxieties around making a living, anxieties around money. But in general, it refers to all challenges. And how do one protect themselves from these anxieties and these challenges? You build an ark, says the Baal Shem Tov. The word teva in Hebrew means ark, but it also means word. Tevis, letters. You say the words of, the Baal Shem Tov says, of Torah and prayer. They build an ark around you that protects you and insulates you from the floodwaters of life. What it means in simple terms is the spiritual literature and spiritual prayers and the soulful experiences we have actually build an ark around you. And that gives you the ability to float and be protected and float above these waters. That doesn't mean we're not engaging with them. People go to work. People deal with the floodwaters, but you have an ability to ride through them. You ride through them because you have, going back to what I said, perspective. You have perspective and you have that which protects you. If you feel you're a part of the material world, so of course the material world can overwhelm you because you're part of you're vulnerable to the floodwaters. But if you have additional resources, you have something to fall back on, that even when things are difficult, you have something you can read, some holy words, something you can study, something you can pray, something you can, like an oasis, then you suddenly have for yourself a teva, you have words, you have holy words that protect us. So in a sense, when we do study these more sublime ideas, which are transcendent ideas, transcend the regular routine and monotony of our daily patterns, our daily activities, and you can experience something soulful, like a little bit like listening to music. What does that do for you? It frees you, it transports you to another time and place, and creates an oasis, creates an ability to be somewhat insulated, somewhat protected from the floodwaters around you. In a way, when we talk about Shabbat. 6 days of the week you shall work, and 1 day is Shabbat. Shabbat is an oasis in time. It insists that you take a day and you shut off as much as possible the material world. The drive for success in your work, all the other things were involved materially, in order to be focused on what? On your soul. In a way, every day when you pray or you study, the words of Torah, as I said, Teva, the words, the holy words, again, are these type of oases. So if you want to, in any way, deal with the challenges of life, the first thing is you have to have these arcs. We have to build arcs. These arcs are the ships that allow us to navigate. So in addition to what I said before, this adds another dimension of that type of protection, that type of ability to float. So then what happens? What is your job like? Your job is an ocean that actually carries your ship. As I said before, even the storm becomes your asset. Because what happens with a good strong ship and the water rises, the ship also rises. But that's because you have your oasis, you have your hearth, you have your nurturing environment. So then when you go to work and your work doesn't define you, what defines you is your soul and its soul's mission. So then the work becomes an asset that helps you fulfill your purpose. The water becomes an asset for the boat, for the words, the holy words, to achieve their purpose. And that's how you want to see your life. The material life that we live, whatever it may be, is there to nurture, is there to feed and fuel our spiritual lives. So then the boat and the ship becomes an analogy for your journey, and the material world is the oceans, including the storms, that are there to serve our growth. So then every challenge that comes our way is really an opportunity to make you grow. I'm not justifying pain here. I'm not going to explain it away. We'd all prefer not having that. But the reality is that when you allow it to affect you positively, it makes you a stronger person. Just like the ship gets stronger or more elevated by the storms around it, when it has that ability to protect you from those storms. So you'll see, just an example, I've talked about this a number of times, something fascinating. I thought about it a few years ago, I think. I was thinking about the Middle Ages. You see the books here behind me? This is like small tip of the iceberg of thousands and thousands of books you'll find in Jewish libraries. Now, who composed these books? Now, obviously, there's some modern age books, things written recently, but most of it has been written hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago. The Talmud itself is close to 2,000 years old, and there's commentaries on it. Now, if you think about most of these works, when were they written and under what circumstances? So before I answer that, there's in literature, there's I don't know how recent, but let's say the last few decades, maybe even less, there's this new, an approach they call decomposition, decomposing literature. So often when literature is analyzed by professors and by experts, you read the documents, you read the literature, and you come away to try to understand what the author wants to say, the deeper message, and so on. But then there was developed this theory of decomposition, which is the opposite. Instead of looking at what's composed, to decompose, like almost strip it from its characters, strip it from all the scenes and props and accrements, and get to like what really was going on in the author's life that made him write this. So it's like almost taking as I said, decomposing and breaking down and cutting away all the side stories to get to the core story. And you discover interesting things. The author was going through a painful period, or a divorce, or a love affair, or some other experience in life. And this is the story that was birthed as a result of those experiences. So I thought to myself, okay, let's find out, can we decompose some of the greatest Jewish works ever written? Let's take Rashi. Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki lived in the 11th century, 12th century, in Worms, France, Europe. And he wrote what's considered the commentary on the Bible, on the Torah, and on the Talmud. Known for his concise ability to simplify matters in very short words, he revolutionized basically Torah commentary. Oh, you have people like the Rambam, Maimonides, you have Nachmanides, go through the whole list. Every one of them went through the harshest times in life. Rashi was living at a time there were pogroms in the streets. It was the Middle Ages in Europe. The same thing with the Balei Tosfos, the same thing with the Rashba. The Rambam in his own way had to run. There was the wars then between the Moors, between the Muslims and the Christians. Every one of them lived in very, very difficult times, literally threat of their lives and their families' lives. So I said to myself, when you read their commentary and you try to decompose it, you cannot find one shred, one hint even, to the difficulties they went through. You read these commentaries, and if you didn't know better, you'd think he probably was sitting on a beach somewhere, complete serene, calm environment, and writing a commentary. Because remember, writing requires concentration. It requires research. It requires real introspection. It's not, you can't just, if there's a war going on, you're not writing books where bullets are whizzing. Okay, not bullets, arrows, whatever it is. And you read these commentaries, and not one page, hundreds of pages, and not one commentator, hundreds of commentators, books upon books upon books, and none of them were living in easy times. Where did they have the presence of mind and the composure to be able to write so calmly? Well, we know that they weren't delusional. They had families that they cared about. They loved their families. These were people who were extremely sensitive leaders, had communities they dealt with. They weren't living in some bubble. They knew what was going on in the streets. Rashi himself, it says, was born, his mother when she was pregnant, so she was once walking down the street and there was I don't know if it was a pogrom, but there were some people who were anti-Semites riding down the street, and they were riding a wagon. And the wagon was so wide that she would have been crushed with her baby. So the story goes that in the Worms, I think, I'm not sure what town, city it was where he was born, that she turned around to protect her baby so she would be hurt, but the baby wouldn't be. And they say a miracle happened that the wall indented inward. And for many years they saw that indentation. And that's how Rashi survived. So this was the times they were living in. And yet they had this composure, this peace of mind. How's that possible? Again, not one. I mean, sometimes they'll write about what's going on, but that's very deliberate. And read the commentaries, and it's you're written with such clarity and with such focus. You have to say that they had an unbelievable ability to transcend their circumstances. Not that they didn't know there was challenge and suffering. Of course they knew. But they were able to go to a place and turn on a certain button, turn on a certain channel. They were able to get to a place. Where they went to, understanding what I said before, that the life narrative is a journey. And as difficult as it is right now, you have to be able to see the bigger picture. And when they went there, they were able to write commentary that was not affected by their immediate circumstances. Most people, God forbid, if you were right now in a moment of pain and someone suddenly moved a microphone in front of you, you'd probably yell out and would reflect forever that you were in a painful moment. The ability that even though you're in a painful moment, be able to transcend that comes from someone who has that type of perspective, bird's eye perspective. Again, like meaning, a purpose. And knowing that I'm writing this commentary, it's part of how we will survive, how I will survive, how my children will survive. These are the tools that will carry us through the stormy oceans and the stormy seas. And the fact is, they were right. It did carry them through. And here we are today, we read these commentaries in peace. And yet we're the ones that are going to therapy and we agonize and we're aggravated and we don't even have the peace of mind to write anything close to those type of commentaries. Go explain. The answer is very simple. We have all the external comforts, but we don't have inner peace. We don't have an inner sense of the picture. So there's really no way around this. I know we love painkillers and we'd love to just be able to get rid of pain. And listen, if you can get that, it'll help you. But you can't really escape real pain. You can escape momentary pain. You can't escape the suffering of life. There's going to be things in life, losses, disappointments. As they say, the only way out is through. There's just no way around. There's no detour. So how do you make it through without being overwhelmed? You have ability to go to this oasis. And yes, Shabbat is a tremendous force in people's lives. Because in those years, Shabbat for them was a lifesaver. Now you think Shabbat, there were no pogroms and there was no challenges, but they always knew we're going now to a more spiritual place. And with God's help, we'll be able to make it through. It wasn't easy. We reap today the rewards of the prices they paid. So our challenge today is we don't have those external challenges. Today it's finding that peace in comfortable times, which frankly in some ways harder to do when it's not comfortable. But that's our challenge. And we're not looking to create discomfort. We're not looking to create pain. So the way to deal with it is to be more spiritual, more soulful, more connected to that deeper place. And when you do that, you're able to see the narrative. And the narrative is always a much bigger picture. I think Kierkegaard said, but this is a statement I recently saw in commentaries as well, that we only can understand life backwards, but you have to live life frontwards. You have to live. We live today. We don't see tomorrow. But tomorrow, we can maybe understand yesterday and the day before. Sometimes it takes a little more time, sometimes less time. You look at success stories. We all love success stories. But look at the history of a success story. It never begins with a success. There's always a failure or two or more. The bankruptcies, setbacks. We see the end, so we say, I wanted to have the end. Then you go back and look at how was it birthed. It came with pain and often failure and with a lot of setbacks and people saying it won't work. So when you look back, it's a beautiful story. They didn't take no for an answer. They didn't let a setback affect them. On the contrary, they fixed it and made it better until now we have this success story. And even mistakes and even setbacks and even liabilities turned into assets. All these different, I never did a study, but how many inventions happened through mistakes? The Post-its was a mistake. Just to give one example. They were looking for the right type of glue, and it was not too strong, not too weak, and they found out here the glue was too weak, but then it became an excellent way to hold on to. We use Post-its today, and you think, wow, brilliant invention. It was a mistake. Not a mistake. Maybe there are no real mistakes in heaven, but in our perspective, now someone could have just thrown it out and said it didn't work, and that was it. No, they said, how could I use it? And I'm sure you can come up with examples. There's real classic ones. They're not coming to mind. Huh? Penicillin. Many. I would venture to say even most probably. Because what do you think? How did anyone figure out that coffee beans yield coffee? No one came up with an idea, this bean, maybe it creates coffee. There was no coffee to think about. So probably what happened was they realized that heat, does things, fire does things, crushing things does things. They probably just tested and tested. Or for all we know, a coffee bean fell into a pot or something like that. And then I think I'm almost sure the cocoa bean was discovered that way, and so many other things. And obviously a banana and an apple and an orange doesn't need much innovation. You just peel off the peel and you eat it. But many other things are produced. I always think about grain and wheat. You know how many steps you need to get from a grain to a piece of bread? It's not 2 steps, it's like 20 steps. How'd they figure that out even? If there was divine revelation. And bread, the most basic of all foods. And so many other things. It comes through experimentation, mistakes, setbacks. Suddenly one thing becomes another. I personally know people who become extremely wealthy, successful. They said they never went, plan A didn't work. Plan B didn't even work. It was something they didn't even expect. But you have to show up. You show up, you try this, and then suddenly, the thing you may have felt the thing that you felt may be the least possibility ends up being the greatest one. Now I know these stories are great to hear, inspiring, and when it comes to us, we don't like to hear this story. We want to have, I tried this, it worked or it didn't work. It doesn't work that way. Even things that don't appear to be working may actually be working, but not the way you planned it. So you have to realize that it's a film, it's a story, it's a larger narrative. You invested in something, believe in what you invested. You may have to be humbled and realize it's not going this way, it may go that way. And sometimes we learn that this is not the way to go. That's also a lesson, But these are all based on an attitude that I said is tied up to a humility and a recognition that there's a bigger story. There's a choreography. Now, does that make the pain less? I want to reiterate again, it doesn't make the actual pain less, but it makes it bearable. It makes it manageable, and you can navigate through it. We all prefer no storms, but a storm can be navigated. A good swimmer knows that. A good captain knows that. The rest of us who don't, give up or we think we can't manage. And then it feeds into all our fears and insecurities and inadequacies and all those voices that have told us you can't do it, you're a failure, you're not worth it, whatever it is. So that's why we need to have people around us that believe in us, and that's why we need to access the captain and all the other things I spoke about. So my friends, the bottom line is, we can deal with anything. You need to surround yourself with people who believe that. It really comes down to that. Don't ever give in, don't ever give up, and don't ever give in to those voices of resignation, internally or externally, and realize there is much more to the story than you'll ever know. And I don't think you need a lot of faith to believe that. We all understand that we have inside ourselves all kinds of resources that we may not have accessed. Who with their right mind does not realize that? What is your brain capable of? How much creativity do you have? How many potential talents do you have? How could we know? We only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. But we have to know that we don't know. We know that things we don't know. The worst thing is when you don't know that you don't know, which means you convince yourself, everything I know already. It's not the case. We know very little. We know what we know, but there's a lot more. And sometimes you can be your own worst enemy because you have your blind spots. That's why we turn to others and we listen to others. And we grow from that. And someone gives us some type of idea or hope and so on. And with that, with using all those tools, we can get through anything. As you see, I'm not here to explain why bad things happen to good people. As you know, there is no answer to that question. Only God knows that answer. The only thing we can talk about is what we do about it. That I know absolutely we can get through it. And to me, frankly, that's much more important than knowing why, is to know you can get through it. Because frankly, if you had to choose, which one would you rather? To know why or to know that you can get through it? Because the why ultimately is a philosophical question. And maybe it has some lesson, but the bottom line is if you know the why and you can't get through it, who did it help? You'd rather know, I have the tools and let's forge ahead, and that's where you want to put your energy. And I find many times when we overinvest in knowing why, you actually drain yourself because what's the word? Just out of, Right, spin and just weaken yourself, drain your energy in trying to find something you may never find an answer to. Whereas if you put that focus on what am I going to do about it? How am I going to move through this? How am I going to navigate? It's a whole different story. then there are things that you can do and absolutely are able to do. And remember, everyone looks at proof of concept. This has been done. We have seen people who have gone through extremely difficult situations. So it's not like, oh, okay, I believe the idea, and let's try it. There are thousands of people that have done it. There are many that haven't. There are many that get consumed with they wallow in their own misery, and that's what destroys them. But there are many that have. And as I said, Viktor Frankl observed them and documented it. There are many that have, so we have who to look at. So someone will tell you, I've told somebody, how many people have gone through a difficult, and they say, but how many people haven't? I said, so why are you looking at those that haven't? Why don't you look at those that did? Why are you choosing them as your heroes? The failures, you look at the success stories. Now, that's what we always do. You don't look at fail. Obviously, a person can fail. We all understand that. We all know we can be weak. You don't need proof of that. You need proof that there are people who are strong and they can make it through, and they are capable of doing it. So I conclude with a blessing to everybody that we should have the least amount of challenges and difficulties. To say you should have none is just not, I wouldn't call that a blessing. I would call that just nonsense. We will have challenges, but they should be the minimal. But most importantly, use them as springboards for growth. Get your captain active. Find yourself your mission, your direction. Surround yourself with sacred, holy words and prayers and songs that can insulate, and find friends that can help you float and help you throw you a line when you need it. Take all that together and the other things I discussed, and you'll be far ahead of the game in dealing with navigating through the difficulties of life, and not only not being hurt by them, but actually growing through them. So God bless you all. We should all have a very blessed week. Tonight again is the 10th of Tevet, but we also say at the end of the story, remember I said everything's the end of the story. It's true. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon surrounded the wall and it ended up being a destruction. But the blessing given in the prophet says, Yehavchu yomim elu, that these days will be transformed. The yom tevim l'maydim, l'sasna l'simcha l'maydim tevim. They'll be transformed to joyous days and celebration and to holidays. Because that's the end of the story. There is no such thing as a bad end. It may have bad sections, but there's no such thing as a bad end. The bad end is that even the negative is transformed into a holiday. Right now, it can appear to be a negative, but even that, we also learn our lessons. We strengthen and reinforce our walls, and we do everything possible to strengthen our lives. And the result, we become stronger, and when we become stronger, those so-called days that we honor the negative become also positive energy. So, stay warm. I hope this was a warming conversation. So when you go out to the frigid air, you'll know the analogy. Think of it this way. So you'll say, okay, what do we learn from this cold air? It doesn't make anybody very comfortable. I'll tell you what you learn. You learn that the soul comes down to this world, a cold, hostile world, and you have the power to warm up even the most frigid air. So even that becomes also a lesson. It tells you, yes, life can be very cold. Sometimes it's physically cold. Sometimes it's very warm outside in New York, as you know, or anywhere in the world. But people are cold. So coldness, which one would you prefer? Low temperature or people being cold and indifferent and hostile? Obviously, we'd rather have warmth everywhere. But remember, our mission is not be intimidated by the cold, but to bundle up and warm everyone around us. Like the analogy, when it's cold, you can put on a Pelts, a fur coat, and just warm yourself. Or you can light a nice little fireplace and warm everybody around us. So even the cold has a lesson. Everything can be transformed. Thank you very much.